Chapter 10. Gelendor. Silas slept exceptionally well that night. Sky accompanied him in his tent and slept curled up beside him as they helped to keep each other warm. It was a powerful connection that he had gained with Sky, something that he didn't know he was missing before, but that now filled an obvious emotional hole. Before going to bed that night, Silas reopened his second mind and introduced her to the rest of the group. Torn and Samara were both flabbergasted that a creature like Sky even existed, and Uthrin was just as much, if not more, impressed that he had created a bond with such a legendary creature. Samara couldn't wipe the smile off her face at how cute the moonfox was, and repeatedly told Silas to make sure Sky knew how adorable Samara thought she was. He was glad that everyone accepted her as part of their group, and they each committed to watch after her if danger ever came upon them again. The cold morning air felt crisp in Silas's lungs as he walked down the hill towards the massive stone walls of Gelendor. Sky walked by his side in the dark, ready to turn invisible at any sign of trouble. Geode took the lead, a hungry bluebird perched upon his outstretched finger, negotiating a deal between an aerial scouting mission and a couple of plump night crawlers. It didn't take long to reach their intended destination, the morning sun still yet to peek up above the horizon. Whispering his last bit of instructions to the bluebird, Geode lifted his arm, releasing the bird into the barely lit sky. Silas pulled his hands into the symbol of nature, opening his second mind and connecting his senses with Sky. Her mysterious presence brushed against his, eager to speak with him once again. "I guess it's your turn now," Silas said. "Keep safe. Tell me if you see anything that looks suspicious. Once you get to the wall, turn around and come back. We'll wait for you here." "I'll do my best," Sky said, eager to help her new family with their stealth mission. Her eyes shimmered in the darkness, and a moment later, Silas watched with awe in his eyes as she faded into the shadows, becoming completely invisible.
"Silas,"
Geode whispered, placing a hand on his shoulder.
"There's one last thing I forgot to tell you last night. This technique that connects you to Sky, there's a bit more to it that I forgot to mention. I told you that you are able to communicate over long distances because of the bond that you have made with her, but I forgot to mention that while you are within fairly close ranges of each other, you can actually use the connection to replace her senses with your own. You can see what she sees, feel what she feels."
"I can?" Silas exclaimed.
Geode nodded. "Why don't you try it now? Use the same feelings that you normally would to communicate, but instead of talking, concentrate on truly becoming one with her. Sense what she senses. See what she sees. Give it a try."
Excited, Silas closed his eyes, pushing his consciousness towards his new companion. He felt his inner life flowing through his body as the magic connected him with all of the nature around him. The feeling of freedom flooded over his body as he felt his thoughts flying upon the wind towards his companion. Finally, he focused purely on her as she ran towards the walls of Gelendor. He felt a tickle upon his legs as he ran through the tall grass, cold air rushing past his face. Brisk air swiftly entered and exited his lungs as he moved silently through the dark morning. Sky's vision slowly took over the vision of his second mind as he continued to will her senses to become one with his own. Opening his eyes, he could see what was in front of his physical body, but instead of the second perspective from his ghostly body, he now saw the vision of Sky bounding through the grass as she ran. Testing the telepathic portion of the spell, Silas quietly asked, "Sky, can you hear me?" Silas watched through her eyes as she jumped off the ground and twisted backward in the air. He felt her heartbeat increase rapidly, her head spinning in all directions.
"Where are you? You scared me."
"Oops, sorry. Pretty cool though, right? We can talk even when we're far away. And I can see what you're seeing."
"Yeah, very cool. But how about next time you don't give me a heart attack?"
"Yeah, sorry. Have you seen any humans yet?"
"Not yet. Still looking."
Sky turned back towards Gelendor and continued running towards the city. Her head turned from side to side as she surveyed the area around her. Silas was surprised at how well she could see in the dark. It made sense. He didn't realize it before, but now that he had shared his thoughts with her and vice versa, he had learned that all foxes were primarily nocturnal, not just moon foxes. On top of that, it was like Sky was built to be in the dark. Her bright glowing eyes made seeing in the dark a cinch. The colors of her fur helped her to easily blend in with the shadows of night, and with her ability to become invisible, it was no wonder moon foxes were only seen by the luckiest of the lucky. Silas watched for any signs of movement or signals that there was an ambush waiting for them. As far as he could tell, it looked as though the coast was clear. Sky made it to the massive stone wall and confirmed his thoughts.
Nothing. So, I can come back then?
Yeah, I think so. We must have beat them here. Maybe take a slightly different path back, but I think we might be good to continue. I'll let the others know. Sky agreed, and Silas pulled his senses away from her and felt them return back into the body of his second mind. Closing the connection with the magic completely, a rush of energy filled him.
Now that was cool,
he whispered to the others.
Did you see anything?
Samara asked. Silas shook his head.
Nope. I think we're probably good as long as Geode's bird says the same thing. I could see super well through Sky's eyes, too. I'm almost positive there's nothing waiting for us up there. That's excellent news,
Uthrin said, letting out a sigh of relief.
Still, we should proceed with caution. Geode, how long do you think until the bird gets back? Maybe just a few more minutes. She's quite fast because of her flight, but I don't share a connection with her like Silas does with Sky, so I can only guess.
Silent as a shadow, Sky reappeared out of nothing, standing directly in front of Silas. He jumped slightly, the sight of her glowing eyes, purple fur, and oddly cute but dangerous presence coming out of nowhere startling him. A swift thought of what an adult moonfox, ready to pounce on him and tear him to pieces, flashed across his mind, sending a shiver up his back. He made the symbol of nature, opened his second mind, and connected himself to her.
See anything on the way back?
No, nothing out of the ordinary.
Good deal. Thanks for doing that.
It was fun. I'm good at sneaking around.
Silas didn't doubt it one bit. They waited a few moments longer until Geode reached his hand into the air and caught the blue bird who had just returned on his finger. He stood, staring at the bird for several minutes, obviously having a conversation about what she had to report. Then, reaching into the small bag he had placed the worms in, pulled out 2 large night crawlers and placed them in the bird's open beak. She clamped down on the worms happily and took flight.
She didn't see anything either. She also told me that there's a clear spot where we can teleport into just west of the main gate. There aren't many people up yet, so if we go soon, we won't have to worry about running into anyone. Let us hurry then,
Uthrin said.
While the morning is still young, the sooner we are safe within the walls, the better.
The group walked cautiously and silently towards the city, watchful for any surprises lurking around the trees or in the darkness. Finally, the tenseness was brought to a halt when Uthrin notified them that they were close enough to do the teleport. Geode spent a couple of minutes describing to Uthrin where they needed to teleport to. He had lived in Gelendor for a long time, but needed the bird to be sure that things hadn't changed too much since he had been away, so that they could land in a clear area. The sun was now peeking just over the horizon, making the area around them visible enough to see a fair distance. Silas was sure that the bright light that was going to engulf them during the teleport would still be able to be seen from a far distance, but trusted that it would be all right. After finishing his explanation, Uthrin nodded, then made the symbol of light and opened his second mind. His eyes and hands glowed brightly, and he motioned for everyone to join hands. Silas picked up Sky and placed her on his shoulder, then joined hands in the group.
Everyone ready? Remember, if anyone confronts us after we have entered the city, let Geode and I do the talking.
After seeing confirmed nods of compliance, Uthrin focused the light magic, and a bright pillar of light descended from the heavens and engulfed them in light. Half a second later, the light disappeared with a flash, and they found themselves standing within the walls of the city. As the light dissipated, Silas's eyes filled with wonder. The massive stone wall at his back was taller than any building he had ever seen. Looking towards the city, stone buildings that looked to have been raised directly from the ground, then mystically formed into their shapes, were scattered about. Bright green, flourishing plant life was everywhere. Luscious grass scattered across the ground. Brightly colored trees, bushes, and small plants brought the city to life, strange mystical-looking orbs of green light swirling around most of them. Further in the distance, the stone buildings gradually faded into what appeared to be a sort of organized jungle. Trees 10 times larger than he thought physically possible weaved their way through the city. Wooden buildings that he could have sworn looked like they were grown straight from the trees, scattered amongst their massive branches. Homes, shops, and other buildings held up by trunks and branches that were impossibly large, striking his very soul with wonder. Blinking his eyes, he realized that those trees were the small ones. The deeper into the city he looked, the larger and grander they became. Perfectly paved, stone walkways and streets led the way in front of him, towards what surely had to be the most magnificent place on earth.
"Welcome to Gelendor,"
Geode said with a smile. Silas looked at Samara and Torin, then gazed on silently, unable to put together any coherent string of words. Silas took a quick glance at Geode, wondering how he could possibly be from such an amazing place. Surely a people who lived in a place like this would look vastly different. A tree-dwelling race that had branches growing from their foreheads or something.
"Gelendor should be awaking soon,"
Uthrin said, cutting off his train of thought.
"We should head towards the center of the city. There we will find the great tree of Gelendor, and we can petition to talk to Nidria."
Geode led the way down a stone path towards the massive jungle part of the city. As they walked, Silas began to see people emerging from the stone homes on the outskirts. Some looked upon them with confusion, as if they had never seen people who looked like Silas and the others before. Others gave them a kind wave, then went about their daily business. Against all logical thinking, the people that lived here really were human. Silas realized, however, that it seemed that every person in Gelendor had hair that was as dark and black as night, as well as emerald green eyes that sparkled in the light of the rising sun, just like Geode. Something else that stood out immediately was the fact that magic was a common commodity here, rather than an extreme rarity like back in Shilverst. Even little children seemed to be using magic, albeit simple. Something else that was peculiar was the way that the people here dressed. It seemed as though everyone here was wearing almost the exact same thing. The men had dark green trousers and a lighter green shirt with varying lengths of sleeves. Their boots also had a slight hue of green to them. The women wore dresses that matched the light green color of the men's shirts, many of which had long flowing sleeves with a white stripe that ran down them. Other women had the same type of dress, but they stopped further above the ankle and had shorter sleeves that hugged their arms instead of flowing freely. Silas guessed that these dresses were more for working, while the others were for show. As the sun slowly rose, shining its light upon the city, it brought more and more people out into the streets. Silas continued to look around himself in awe until Torin tapped him on the shoulder.
Silas, look at that!"
Silas turned his head to where Torin was pointing. His jaw dropped when his eyes caught sight of the spectacle. Behind the massive trees holding homes and other buildings, beyond the vines and wooden bridges that were strewn between the trees, connecting the canopies to create what looked to be several layers of cities stacked on top of each other. Above and beyond everything that screamed, "I was planted by the gods themselves," stood an impossible, incomprehensible sight. A gargantuan tree that completely dwarfed everything else around it towered above the canopies. Leaves the size of buildings rustled in a gentle breeze. Geode led the group around a corner, which opened up to a pathway that led directly towards the wonder. The colossal tree sat in the center of a massive fissure in the ground that seemed to separate one side of the city from the other. It stood upon massively tall roots that extended into the chasm of the fissure. A foggy mist caused by several waterfalls that fell from the base of the tree into the chasm rose gently into the air. In front of the tree stretched a large stone bridge with intricately designed railing and archways that connected the tree to the walkable land. Surely, beyond a shadow of a doubt, this was the largest living thing on the entire planet. Its branches stretched upward into the sky, nearly scratching the heavens. Looking towards the base of the tree, Silas noticed a massive wooden door that marked the entrance into the living shelter. Intricately designed wooden planks, along with naturally occurring branches and vines, curled themselves upward from the door, forming several balconies and rooftops. Large windows could also be seen, built into the trunk of the mighty tree, their glass covered with a constant fog from the roaring water and rising steam of the chasm beneath it. It looked like a castle that had been built into the still living tree. The dwarfed trees and other foliage that sat on the edge of the fissure seemed to lean inward towards the massive tree, aspiring in vain to one day be as great as it was.
"It's not possible,"
Samara said in amazement, echoing the very thoughts that were running through Silas's head.
This tree is even older than the knowledge of magic itself,
Geode responded, pride in his voice.
When Nymphara obtained the knowledge of nature magic, she and her followers gathered to this place, drawn towards the greatness of this tree. They poured their magic into this already ancient tree, helping it to grow at a tremendous rate and shaping the land around it to make this kingdom. As she was the first to learn nature magic, Nymphara was the original king of nature. This place became her palace, and from that day forward, her descendants have ruled the kingdom of Gelendor. It is always the firstborn daughter who inherits the throne. After that, the inheritance falls to any other daughter of the previous queen, and finally, if none else are suitable, to one of their sons. Gelendor is primarily a matriarchy, but if the time calls for it, a man is able to take the throne for a time.
Geode gestured for them to follow him towards the massive gate that hung at the beginning of the long stone bridge as he continued.
Magic is sung into the tree daily. It helps to provide the vast amount of nourishment that it needs to continue to live and flourish. The technique of singing magic into living things to enhance their growth and life has been passed down from Nymphara through the royal family, and Queen Nydria keeps the tradition going today.
Silas continued to marvel at everything around him as they approached the stone bridge leading to the tree. Sky had turned invisible, but Silas knew she was still there as she rubbed against his legs occasionally as they walked. He wanted to talk to her about the incredible sights they were seeing, but decided against using magic in the city for now. "Do you have an appointment?" a woman clothed in nature battle mage robes asked as they approached the gate leading to the stone bridge. She had long black hair and bright green eyes that almost looked like she was constantly channeling nature magic. Her smile and kind demeanor didn't hide the obvious appearance of being able to handle herself in a fight, however.
"No, we don't," Geode said, approaching her. "But we have information that's vital for the Queen to hear."
"Is that so?" she responded, raising an eyebrow. "Well, without an appointment, I'm afraid you'll be out of luck. If you would like to make an appointment to see her, I can help you with that." Geode looked to Silas, nodding and holding out his hand. Silas immediately knew what Geode was asking for. He reached down the front of his shirt and pulled out the amulet that was hiding behind it. Pulling it off his neck, he handed the ancient artifact to Geode. Geode stepped towards the woman, slowly handing the amulet to her. Her smile faded away as the amulet was placed into her open palm. Purple light bounced off the terrified look of her face from the stone of darkness as she peered into the silver amulet.
"I think you know what this is?"
Geode asked softly. "This can't be. How? Where did you get this?" Her green, worried-filled eyes flicked up to Geode. After a moment, a slight look of recognition seemed to cross her face. "Wait a minute. Do I know you?" She scanned the faces of the party, her eyes seeming to only have a sense of recognition for Geode. "Are you—"
"Please," Geode said, interrupting her. "We really need to talk to Queen Nydria. It's very important, as you can see. Can you help us?"
The woman rubbed her thumb over the stone of darkness, and a cold sense of fear crossed over her face. She shook herself, as if trying to rid the dark thoughts that had just come over her, then hurriedly handed the amulet back to Geode. "Right then, I'll bring you to her. Please, follow me." She made the symbol of nature, and her eyes and hands began to glow. Waving her hands, several roots that were wrapped around the large gate began to unravel, and the gate slowly swung open with a loud creak. Silas felt Sky rub against his leg, signifying that she was still there as he followed Geode across the large stone bridge. Silas felt his blood grow cold as he walked across the massive stone bridge. He tried not to look down, but his natural morbid curiosity unfortunately got the better of him. The chasm seemed unending, infinite. Its depths looked to descend even past the horrible underworld that kids would always tease each other about. It took nearly everything that he had to continue walking across the bridge, praying that their additional weight wouldn't cause the bridge to fail, causing them to fall into oblivion. As they grew closer to the tree, the roaring of the waterfalls that fell behind it became so loud that he could hardly hear himself think. The rumbling of the massive amounts of water seemed to vibrate through his body, reverberating within his chest like the pounding of a massive drum. Arriving at the huge wooden door that led into the tree, several guards standing at the door raised their hands to greet them. The woman leading them gave the guards a nod, causing the guards to step aside. Grabbing the large metal handles of the door, they pulled it open, revealing the inside of the tree's trunk. Silas stepped through the doors, grateful to no longer be suspended above an endless pit. He found himself inside a long, polished wooden tunnel. Green, glowing orbs of magic energy floated at evenly spaced distances within the tunnel, lighting it with a somewhat eerie green glow. Endless dark-colored rings of wood spiraled through the tunnel, showing how ancient the tree really was. Exiting the long wooden tunnel, the tree opened up into a massive central room. His mind spun at how impossible it was that he was still inside of a tree as he gazed at his surroundings. The room was several stories high, flights of spiraling staircases that led to different parts of the tree swirling in each of the corners of the room. Hallways that led into what had to be hundreds of different sections of the palace were connected by small wooden tunnels throughout the tree. He felt like an ant exploring through a great oak as they were led through tunnels, climbed staircases, and crossed wooden bridges, all contained within the tree. Eventually, they came to a stop at the end of a particularly long tunnel that led to a large wooden door. The door appeared almost as ancient as the wood that surrounded it, the same symbol of the tree that was on Geode's battle robes etched into the top of its dark wooden trimming. The woman placed her hands on the door and knocked 3 times. A couple of moments later, the door opened slightly, and a large man with the male version of nature battle mage robes walked out.
"What is it?"
he asked in a deep, burly voice. "These people have requested to talk to Queen Nidria, and I believe that their reasoning is sound."
"I don't have any appointments on my schedule. What's this about?"
"It's really an urgent matter. I can—"
"I'll be the judge as to whether or not it's important enough to request visitation with the Queen without an appointment."
The guard had deep green eyes and night black hair that fell over his eyes slightly. He stepped out of the door and closed it behind him. He had muscles that looked like he could yank a tree out of the ground with his bare hands. He looked straight at Geode, curiously studying his nature battle mage robes that were of a slightly different design than his own.
"Those robes are of an old design. I think I recognize them, though. You got them from here in Gellandor, didn't you?" "I did indeed," Geode responded. "I used to be in the military group known as River Walkers. We were in charge of protecting the outer wall, as well as helping neighboring cities when necessary."
"I've heard of it," the guard said.
"It was a bit before my time, though."
Geode nodded.
10 years ago, I was sent to Shilverst when the Dark Mage Malos attacked. We were unsuccessful, as you know, but I decided to take residence there and try to help out the people that lived there as much as I could without being too noticeable.
The man said, continuing to study Geode.
"Well, go on then. I can respect someone that used to be a river walker. What's this you need to tell Queen Nidria about?"
Geode stretched forth his hand and presented the amulet to the man.
"Do you recognize this?"
Grabbing it by its silver chain, he lifted it out of Geode's hand and studied it. The Stone of Darkness was still sitting in the center of the amulet, glowing with its eerie, wispy purple light amidst the sea of darkness within. The guard took a step back, his eyes wide.
"The stories are true?"
His eyes lingered on the Stone of Darkness, then slowly made their way back to Geode.
"Where did you find this?" "That's what we've come to discuss with Queen Nidria. We need to make plans for what to do with it. We want to make sure it doesn't fall into Malos' hands."
The man stood wide-eyed at the information that was presented to him. He hardened his expression as he scanned the group of strangers in front of him.
"Nidria will be anxious to hear what you have to say. Follow me."
Handing the amulet back to Geode, the guard turned and opened the large wooden door behind him and extended his arm, gesturing for them to enter. Geode handed the amulet to Silas, which he placed around his neck and tucked under his shirt. The metal amulet felt cold against his skin, colder than it should have felt, like it had been sitting in an icy stream all morning long. Silas checked once more for Skye by shuffling his feet to the side until he felt her bump into his leg again. "I have to find a better way of knowing she's around while she's invisible," he thought. He followed Geode and Uthrin through the door and into a large room with high vaulted ceilings. Vines from the massive tree climbed up the wooden walls and wrapped themselves along the many carvings and symbols that were engraved into the walls. At the back of the room, 2 guards stood at the ready next to a large wooden throne. The guards were wearing battle mage robes, but they looked slightly different from the other robes that Silas had seen. The robes had golden trim that swirled around the tree symbol in the middle of their chest, and the colors of the robes were slightly brighter, signifying probably the high ranks that they needed to guard the queen directly. The guards held large spears and round wooden bucklers. Just by looking at them, Silas knew that the guards would be just as dangerous with magic as they would be with their weapons. Behind the throne were several large stone statues of mostly women. Atop of all their heads were metal crowns signifying their royalty. A woman, whom Silas guessed to be Nidria, sat on the throne watching as they entered the room. She was much younger than Silas had pictured in his mind. He guessed that she might even be just a few years older than himself. She had the same, almost copper-toned skin as Geode, and his same dark black hair, flowing over her shoulders down to about her mid-torso. A metallic crown with a bright green emerald sat atop her head. Her robes were bright green with gold trim around the edges. A bright silver trim ran down her sleeves and swirled across her chest, finally meeting at the belt area.
My greetings, friends. How may I be of service to you today?
Nidria asked. Geode took a step forward, then knelt on one knee, bowing himself before her. Uthrin did the same, causing Samara, Torin, and Silas to quickly follow their example to show their respects.
Greetings, Queen Nidria. My name is Geode, and these are my companions and friends. We have traveled here from Shilverst, seeking your counsel and wisdom. We have some grave news concerning Melos and wish to ask for your help and guidance.
Raising her hand in the air, she gestured for them to stand up.
Please, arise. What news do you have concerning Melos, and how does it concern the people of the kingdom of Gelendor?
Geode and the rest of the group stood up, and he continued.
My queen, I was once a part of this great city, and served under your mother as a river walker before Melos attacked. I knew your great mother personally, and know from conversations with her that as direct descendants of the great Nymphara, you and your family possess a great deal of knowledge concerning the Vault of Kings and the elemental stones of power.
Nidria again raised her hand, cutting him off. She looked over at the woman that had been their guide, as well as the guard that let them through the door, and with a smile asked if they would leave them to discuss the matter alone. With disappointed looks, they both agreed and left the room. Silas imagined them pressing their ears against the other side of the now closed door in hopes of catching pieces of the secret conversation, like he had done so many times at his parents' door.
Please, continue, Geode.
Yes, my queen. As you may or may not know, there was a dark mage by the name of Arakorn, who associated closely with Melos for some time. He gained great strength in darkness magic, and built a crypt just outside the town of Shilverst.
He stretched his hand out towards Uthrin and continued.
We don't know exactly what he was doing there, but eventually Uthrin and others from the Council of Light from Sindmir felt a dark presence and decided to investigate. Upon finding the crypt, they did further investigation and ultimately were forced to slay Arakorn. They believed that they had destroyed all of the evil that he had conjured down there, but it was not so. Many years passed, and these young folks were exploring the ruins of the ancient crypt and accidentally discovered something.
Geode turned to Silas.
Silas, would you kindly show Queen Nidria what you found?
Silas reached his hands up to the back of his head, grabbed the amulet by its silver chain, and removed it from his neck. The artificial light that was created by the orbs hanging in the room glinted off the amulet as he held it in the air. The stone of darkness sat in the center, staring at Nidria with its cold, dark, wispy aura. Nidria leaned forward in her throne and stared back at the stone with a worried look. She then raised a hand and spoke to Silas.
Can you please bring that to me? I would like to have a closer look.
Silas nodded and walked towards Nidria, keeping the amulet held out in front of him. Upon arriving at the throne, he placed the amulet into the outstretched hand of Nidria, then took a couple of steps backward. Nidria held the amulet by its chain and examined it for some time. She then grabbed its metal surface and brought it close to her face so that she could stare into the depth of dark color the stone emanated. Without breaking her concentration on the stone, she asked,
What is your name?
My name is Silas, Queen Nidria,
Silas, this is quite the mess you've gotten yourself into. She ran a finger over the stone, her eyes reflecting deep contemplation as she studied the ancient artifact and the powerful stone embedded in its center. Eventually, she stretched her hand forward, placing the amulet back into his hand. So, Geode, what is it that you want to hear from me? I'm interested in hearing your plans as to what you intend to do with this discovery, but I would like to know what you want to ask me first.
I was hoping you would be able to tell us more about the Vault of Kings. Being at the rank I was entitled to little more than the rumored information that floated amongst those who were curious enough to receive it. I know that many details about it are well-kept secrets amongst the royal families. I wondered if you would be able to shed some light on the subject.
Nydria sat back in her throne and put a hand on her chin. Very well. I'm willing to talk about some of what I know. How far back do I need to go? I assume that you all know who the original kings were?
We've taught them some of the history of magic and told them about the original kings and how they obtained their power, but have not given them much information beyond that,
Geode said, gesturing to Torin, Samara, and Silas. Very well, then. We can start from there. The original 6 mages are also known as the first kings. Nymphara, my ancestor, was one of these kings, she being the first to master the power of nature. The kings gained much power and influence from the gift that the gods gave them, yet still they desired more. Legend tells that the 6 kings came together and climbed the Kandaren mountains to see if they could receive more power and knowledge from the gods. They heard a voice of warning descend from the heavens, telling them that if they sought out too much power, they would become corrupted and ultimately consumed by that lust for power. They did not heed that voice, however, and continued to pray to the gods for additional knowledge. An angelic creature descended from the heavens and granted them their request. Nydria shifted in her throne. The description of what he looked like has passed down from my family, described him as having dark black wings, wearing nothing on his torso, and dark black robes from the waist down. His name was Erebus, god of darkness. It was said that he had 7 orbs hovering around him, orbiting slowly as if he was the center of his own universe. They described him as terrifying, and at the same time awe-inspiring. He told them about the history of the heavens, and more about each of the elements that they already possessed. He taught them about the hierarchy of the heavens, about each of the gods that ruled over the different elements, and divulged to them many other secrets. Sadly, the majority of those details have been lost through time. I don't think that they were lost because they weren't important, though. I think they were lost because they were too important, too great for mortals to know, and were probably forgotten on purpose. Nydria looked towards the amulet. The angel, or god, pulled 6 of the 7 orbs from around him, and using his godly powers transformed them into the 6 elemental stones that we know of today, one of which you have in your possession. As you may or may not already know, the elemental stones give the person that possesses them additional power and an advantage to learning new techniques when using magic of that element. When you are in possession of one of the stones, you are able to achieve feats with that element in a short amount of time that would rival that of a master who has studied that element for a lifetime. Silas looked down at the amulet, peering into the stone of darkness in its center. The angelic being also gave unto them a secret, which proved his warning to be true about the possibility of corruption and lust for power. The kings regretted their decision to plead for more knowledge, wishing they had heeded the warning of the gods. All 6 kings decided that the secret was too great for man to know. If it fell into the wrong hands, it would spell doom for all. They asked the angelic being to forge for them a key and build for them a vault that could only be unlocked with that key. They desired that the key should be able to contain all of the elemental stones, so that the only way that the vault could be opened was if all 6 of the original kings, or their predecessors, came together in unison and harmony to unlock the vault. They hoped to try and prevent anyone from coming and stealing the secret without consent from everyone else, or one tribe taking dominance over the others by requiring that each stone be placed into the key for it to work on the vault. Nydria looked Silas in the eye. The knowledge of whatever is contained in the vault was lost when the last of the original kings died. The stones were eventually hidden in safe places or lost due to the corruption of man and their lust for power. No one truly knows what is contained within the Vault of Kings. All I know is that whatever it is, it will give the wielder immense power and a knowledge of something that the original kings thought should not be known to the world. Standing up from her throne, Nidria approached Silas with an outstretched hand. I was told that the kings voted to give the key to the first mage, Zephyr. I was taught that he vowed to keep it secure so that it wouldn't fall into the hands of someone who would try to collect all of the stones and use whatever was inside to assert dominance over the land. Silas placed the amulet in her hand and watched as she examined it again, slowly turning it around in her hands and feeling the stone of darkness with her fingers. Over the years, its existence turned into a myth, which in my opinion is safer for the world anyway. Somehow, it must have been stolen or traded away and forgotten to end up in Arakorn's possession. It's nothing short of miraculous to be holding it in my hands. Nidria eyed each of them, studying their intents. I would like to know what your intentions with this amulet are. It was Uthrin who spoke up this time, as he slowly walked closer to Nidria and Silas.
The reason we have come to you is for both guidance and help. As you know, Melos has almost all of Evandrel under his strict rule, and the cities that he rules are slowly dying. Only Gelendor, Sindemir, and Windrith were able to withstand his first wave of attacks 10 years ago. I'm sure that he's preparing for another attack as we speak, and this time he won't stop until he gains control of everything.
We have thwarted Melos and his attempts at taking over our great city, and we will do it again. Have you seen any evidence of him preparing to attack?
Not exactly, but we do have great reason to believe that he has plans to attack again. We also worry, because we believe he has gained much more power since the last time he attacked. What do you know about darkness magic?
Nidria handed the amulet back to Silas and looked into Uthrin's eyes. I know that it's evil, despite what others may say to try and defend it. I also know that it's very powerful and resourceful, and can be very dangerous. You should think the same as I do, Light Mage. You know very well that darkness is not an element that can be trusted.
You should know, then, of some of the capabilities that it has when it's used by a master as capable as Melos.
Uthrin responded.
I've been studying an old book of ancient nature that one of my instructors gave me long ago. It was a book on advanced darkness techniques and theories as to what might be able to be accomplished if someone were to gain enough power. I have evidence to believe that Melos has unlocked some of these ancient, dark secrets. Arakorn worked with Melos extensively on something very dark, and I believe that he succeeded before the Council of Light and I were able to stop him.
Uthrin looked at Silas, his eyes full of fear and concern.
One of those techniques, I believe he mastered, is called Living Darkness. It is an ancient, evil art that is only mentioned in the most obscure texts. If what I have studied is true, then it is a way to take part of your soul and bind it to an object, thus allowing you to, if your body dies, have someone remove your soul from that object into another body, and you will live once again in that new body. I believe that Melos and Arakorn must have figured out how to do this, and a part of Melos is bound to the Stone of Darkness.
Uthrin, Geode said, his eyes falling upon Silas, as if he didn't want Silas to be hearing where this conversation was going. Uthrin continued, casting his eyes away from Geode.
I believe that when Silas touched the stone, something might have gone wrong with the spell. I believe that the power of living darkness that was meant to remain within the Stone of Darkness was somehow transferred into Silas.
Silas's eyes grew wide, the realization of what Uthrin was saying starting to sink into him.
Along with this and many other problems, I have reason to believe that Melos is building an army of skeletons brought back to life with an ancient form of darkness magic, to once again try his hand at conquering the cities that he was not able to overthrow the first time.
Nidria walked back to her throne and sat down. Her eyes didn't leave Silas, as if she now saw a stain that corrupted his very soul. Obviously troubled, she put on a facade of confidence. So, what's your plan then? Find a way to rid this living darkness from inside of Silas? Find all of the stones and combine them with the amulet. Gain the knowledge inside the Vault of Kings to try and stop him before his plans can be fulfilled. I hope you realize that I will not endorse a mission to go directly against the wishes of my ancestor and all of the original kings to gather the stones together and seek out the vault. Geode bowed his head slightly as he spoke.
My queen, you must realize that it's only a matter of time before Melos is able to enforce his rule over not only Gelendor, but other strong cities as well. He won't stop until he's the supreme ruler over everything. We can't let him gain enough power to do that. He's hunting us down right this very moment because he knows that we have the Stone of Darkness in our possession. He most likely knows that we are here in Gelendor. He could be at your doorstep any day now. We have the amulet, so that can be to our advantage. Arakorn must have found it at some point and hid it away to one day use as leverage against Melos if he ever felt that he was not getting the recognition he felt he deserved, or some other dark purpose. If Melos were to get the amulet, he would stop at nothing to find the remainder of the stones and open the vault himself. We need something to give us the power to defeat him and rid the land of his presence before any of that can happen. Whatever is in that vault might be the key to ending this war.
My ancestors and the rest of the kings kept whatever is in the vault a secret to protect us, she responded sharply. They knew in their wisdom that it was not right for it to be known to the world, so they hid it away. I will not entertain this conversation any longer. Queen Nydria slammed her fist on her throne, causing her 2 guards to shift slightly in the defensive. However, she added, you bring up a good point about not wanting the amulet or the stone to fall into his hands. So, I will be taking that from you now. Nydria reached her hand out towards Silas and petitioned him to hand it over. Silas looked to Geode and Uthrin for guidance, but the guards at her side quickly stepped forward, forcing him to comply. Reluctantly, Silas placed the amulet into her hand, which she promptly placed around her neck. Rest assured, the amulet will be safe here with me. You are all welcome to stay in Gelendor until you feel it's safe to leave, but I expect none of this conversation to be mentioned outside these walls. Is that understood? Geode and Uthrin looked at each other for a moment, then with a sad countenance agreed to her demands. Nydria nodded and sat back in her throne. Very good. Well, then, if there's nothing else, I will thank you for your concern, assure you that we are safe within the walls of our great city, and bid you a good day. Guards, will you please kindly escort our friends out of the great tree?
Yes, my queen.
The guards both said in unison as they slipped their spears and bucklers onto their backs. Without giving them the chance to argue, the guards escorted them through the many tunnels and staircases of the great tree until they were at the large wooden door in front of the stone bridge. They then told them to enjoy their stay in Gelendor before opening the doors and ushering them out onto the bridge. Silas and the others slowly walked across the bridge, their heads hanging lower than usual. So, what now? Torin finally said, breaking the silence. Does this mean we just go home and back to our old lives? Uthrin sighed.
I'm so surprised. I thought for sure she would want to help. As it is, it looks as if our journey has been cut short. It's not all bad news,
Geode said, trying to lift their spirits.
You kids won't be exposed to any more danger, and I'm sure that your parents will be happy to see you back sooner than anticipated.
Uthrin shook his head.
I fear that it's just a matter of time until things go from bad to worse.
Geode smiled, and changing his tone of voice slightly, put his hand on Silas's shoulder.
Not all hope is lost. As Nydria said, Gelendor is a strong city. As long as the amulet and the Stone of Darkness are here, it means that Melos won't have access to it. We should be proud. Our mission is complete. It's not what we thought it would be, but nevertheless, we did our job in making sure that it wouldn't fall into Melos' hands. Well done, to all of us.
Uthrin sighed, his countenance growing slightly.
Thank you, Geode. You're always able to lighten the mood.
Geode smiled.
Now, we can enjoy ourselves. This doesn't mean that we have to go home empty-handed. We will stay here in the city for a while to try and get Melos off our trail. In the meantime, we should look for something to bring home to your families. The stone will be in good hands here, and I don't think that there's anything else we can do to change Queen Nydria's mind. So, we might as well make the best of our stay in Gelendor.
Silas half smiled, then remembered his previous conversation with Geode. Can we find someone to enchant something for me so that I can talk to Sky more easily? I'd really like to be able to do that before we return to Shilverst.
That sounds like an excellent idea,
Uthrin replied, trying to match the energy of Geode.
We should try and find something for all of you to bring back. We worked hard to get here, and I think we deserve a bit of a break. Geode,
Do you know of any good places to eat around here? I'm starving, Torin said, trying to help cheer up the rest of the group. The sound of a nice hot meal made Silas's stomach growl. Yes, that's what I vote we do first too, Samara added.
As a matter of fact, I do know of a place,
Geode replied.
It's also a place where we can stay for the night in a warm bed rather than on the ground. To the Flowing Tree-Line Tavern, it is.
The thought of sleeping in a bed almost sounded better than a hot meal to Silas. He picked up the pace to keep up with the others who were now almost jogging to get across the bridge. It's not all bad, he thought. Now we can go home and I won't have to worry about getting killed every minute of the day. I won't have the weight of needing to find all the stones on my shoulders anymore, and I'll get to see my family again. It's not all bad news. This is probably the way things needed to happen anyway. Better for everyone.